A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. Jesus said to his disciples, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that bears no fruit, he cuts away. And every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes to make it bear even more. You are pruned already by the means of the word that I have spoken to you. Make your home in me, as I make mine in you. As a branch cannot bear fruit all by itself, but must remain part of the vine, neither can you unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever remains in me, with me in him, bears fruit in plenty. For cut off from me, you can do nothing. Anyone who does not remain in me is like a branch that's been thrown away. He withers. These branches are collected and thrown on the fire, and they are burnt. If you remain in me, and my word remains in you, you may ask what you will, and you will get it. It is to the glory of my Father that you should bear much fruit, and then you will be my disciples." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise the Lord. So, as I said to the beginning of Mass, today we celebrate the feast day of Saint Bridget of Sweden, who Pope St. John Paul, made a patron of Europe, going back sometime in the 70s, I think it was, or the 80s. And Saint Bridget led a very good life. When she was Queen of Sweden, she was renowned for her generosity and her care of the poor. And when her husband died, she gave up all the luxuries of a queen, and she led a more ascetic life, giving away a lot of her possessions. And she couldn't have done that, or wouldn't have been interested in that, unless she was connected to the Lord. In other words, that everything in our lives, all the good things that we do in our lives, are come because of our connection with Jesus Christ. And it says it here in the Gospel. Jesus tells us, that we, as a branch, cannot bear fruit all by itself, but must remain part of the vine. Neither can you unless you remain in me. And the thing about bearing fruit, that if we're not connected to Jesus, our lives, you could say, are more in the zombie-like. In other words, our lives are pretty deadpan. That we live our lives in some degree in a pointless way, because our lives are to be connected with Jesus. We were created. Our purpose is to live this life connected to Jesus Christ, who gives us the grace to live this life to the full, to become the person that God created us to be. Unless we become the person that God created each of us to be in this life, well, then we're kind of living a zombie life. And as they say, if we're not connected to Jesus, there is nothing to change our lives to. It is Jesus who gives our lives, brings out the goodness in our lives. And unless we're connected to Jesus and have faith in Jesus and his word in our lives, then unless we're connected to him, then we have nothing to change to, if you understand the difference. That it is God who creates, it is through God that goodness comes. God is goodness. And that goodness is part of our lives as well, because we are part of God. But if we're not part of God, well, then there is no goodness in our lives. Each action is we could say, is the same as the next. It has a meaningless kind of existence. So it is Bridget of Sweden that we celebrate today, and the reason that John Paul II made her patron of Europe is the saints that we see have gone before us. They are ordinary people like you and I. They're no different. They struggled with daily life in various ways. And even if you're a queen, you're struggling with life. Maybe not the same way that other people struggle, but you struggle. And her example to us is faithfulness to Christ. This the example of Bridget is our faithfulness to Christ, but also the fruits of being connected to Jesus Christ in our lives. The fruit of being connected to Jesus, where we become the person that God created to be. Is Saint Bridget an example of someone who who stayed connected to Jesus throughout her life and became the person that God created her to be. That's why she's a saint. And God calls each and every one of us here today to be saints. But we can only achieve that. We can only achieve it by staying connected to Jesus and to listening to him every day in our lives, to listening to his word, which is guiding us, leading us forth, to make right decisions, to do what is right and good. That's what we're called to do what is right and good every day in our lives. And we can only do that through our connection with Jesus Christ. You know, we cannot, if we ignore Jesus in our lives, well then nothing else is going to be right. It's only when we let Jesus into our lives and are fully aware of his presence and his grace, can we then achieve the great things, as Saint Bridget of Sweden did. So today, when we think of Saint Bridget, we think perhaps only all the saints, Saint Bridget in Ireland, or Saint Patrick, or any of the saints you care to mention, Saint Mary Magdalene yesterday. Their lives are only possible, and we only remember them, we only know of them because of their connection with Jesus Christ. If Mary Magdalene hadn't had contact with Jesus and taken his word to her heart, we'd never heard of her. She just disappeared into the mists of time. The same with Saint Bridget of Sweden, Saint Bridget of Ireland, any saint you care to mention. They're saints, and we know of them because of their faith. And their faith is the example to us that faithfulness to Christ, through faithfulness to Christ, we become the person that Christ created us to be, that God created us to be. Now make our